This is the second of two videos. What I've done here is I've highlighted everything, and it's in my beams. I'm going to right click and make it a group. So now what we're going to see in a second here, if we can turn on all of our layers, we have essentially the framing plan. Things are color coded, if you would. So the framing plan, except things are not tied to elevation. So you can start thinking about that, saying, well, let's say you're going to use those basic lines to be your bottoms. All right, the baselines are going to be your bottoms. So that means that each of these levels, if this was going to sit the girder level would be fine, but if you're going to have 30-inch girders, you would need to take this level here, which is your beam girder, and you have to move it up basically 30 inches, right? So that's how it would sit. Now that would look kind of silly to sitting up there, but that depiction is what you've got. Well, let's see why in fact you made these components. Well, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to camera, standard views, top. You know, in the end, we can now go to a set of components over here, and we can go to the in model. And in model was a generic beam. I'll put it here. And that generic beam, however, can very quickly and efficiently be made into something that's not so generic. So we can go here. You've got that baseline here. We can go ahead and explode that. And in fact, this is where very often you might want to have a box around that you can always kind of sketch on top of. But I'm going to go ahead and push that up. And I would really like to be now on a new layer, window, layers, and I'm going to just make this for now beam render. Okay, and that beam render here now, as I go ahead and make something here, I'm going to go ahead and just draft a basic cheesy shape. I'm going to go ahead now and select that. I'm going to hit control. We're going to go maybe bottom, top, don't really know which one I was going to grab at this point. Hit that control. I'm holding the control key so I can do a copy. I can now go out here, and we wouldn't have had to actually explode that component. I want to point that out. It probably was a bad idea, but now I can use the sweep tool by grabbing what I'm going to sweep, and then what I'm going to sweep along, hit that there. You don't, of course, want to lose your reference system in this, but which I probably did, so I'm just going to try this anyway. I'm going to go across to here, right click, change my layer to whatever I want to change it to, right click, make a component. The mo component is going to be beam underscore generic. Set component axes. We're going to need to really want to be careful how we did this. Remember we had that one there and that one was there. I think that was the way it was. I'm going to create, and it should then in the end, if I do it correctly, it should have worked. So let's double check what we did wrong. Let's look at what our definition of the generic, right click here, entity info, probably beam render. Beam generic. What did we want to call it? So let's go. It may be a capitalization issue, so be careful of that. Windows, components, in model, beam generic, column generic, generic beam. Beam generic and generic beam. So that would be the difference. So that kind of ability to go ahead and, well, let's just do this. You've got your generic beam and beam generic. Let's just see how we can make that work. We'll bring on our generic beam once again. Go ahead and put it there. We can click inside of it now. And now what we can do is we can bring a component, which is a nested component, beam generic and generic beam. How about beam generic? That works a little bit better. So we can go ahead and bring that in there. You saw that last comment was you can't not make something recursive. So we're going to close component. And now when we go about doing this here, you'll see that they've all been updated. So that sense of being able to kind of get some baseline work and then kind of nest underneath it, that's going to be worthwhile. So You don't necessarily have to go one inside the other, but that actually is not a bad idea to have a different block or a different component that kind of tags along with these others. That's done in Revit obviously a little bit differently, but the concept is the same. You could now, that was a bottom down, bottom up. We can finish, let's try our, we talked about making our girders, if you would, 30 something inches. Let's see what our distance is here. So we're going to go ahead here and go up. We're going to go ahead and click on that, see what our general height is. Entity info, that was about 30 inches, something I drafted wrong. We're going to come back out here now. We can get rid of these. We don't need to carry them around on the side. Camera, standard views top. We could just now bring in a component. This component is going to be generic girder. I'll bring that in. If you notice that there, I don't necessarily have to go through all that process, though it's a good idea to not just to consume, if you would, what you have, but instead of by linking different things to different, nesting, if you would, repeating shapes, especially your section shapes. So I'm going to go ahead here, double click inside, and inside of that, if you would, zoom in here if I can. Inside of that, I can now sketch, if I would, a shape. Now I wanted my shape to be, and I'm going to need to do this, however. Before I sketch my shape, I'm going to get a box out here because I always need my box. And my box is not coming in too good, probably because, there it is, something to do sometimes. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and move that box. Sometimes things don't grab, the edges don't grab. So we're going to almost run out of time here. I'm going to try it one more time. Sometimes this box here, which is a sketchy physics box, you see what it's doing here. It's trying to grab particular directions here, and I'm not finding them. So I'm going to quit out of this. Generally what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into that. I'm going to file, save as. I should have done that earlier. Sketchup Revit. The idea would be I would redefine my entity right here. I would take that and redefine it. I'm going to go for route. I'm just going to go and erase it. We'll try it one more time within the time we have here. I'm going to double click inside. I'm going to draft a little box here. It's not really wanting to do. It's pretty interesting that it's having issues with that. That might be too much going on in the drawing. I don't think so. But I'm going to try to draft a box here. Always a good idea then to bring back your axes if you get lost. Someplace here, you're out there. We can go ahead and draft a box someplace down here. You can push that box up. That way we got it. So we want to go into here. If you remember that, I can go ahead right now and draft something in here. And I want that to be maybe 0.5, 2.5. 0.5 feet, 2.5 feet. And what I've got there now is I've got something hopefully that I can grab each of these things. I'm holding a shift key, 1, 2, 3, 4, grabbing those. I'm holding the control key for a copy, taking that to there, getting rid of this, which is not necessary, and then taking this and saying, well, within this entity I can do that until I want to extrude. It doesn't like what I've done there, so I'm going to double check that. I'm going to go ahead and draft right over the top of it, perhaps. Now it does. So now when I say this, select my object that I want to go along, tell it this, it should go like that. Hit that, okay. If you notice now it has kind of gone and done all of your girders. So this is the same general concept that you're going to see inside of Revit. It's this idea of nesting blocks inside of AutoCAD and then being able to go back later and make some changes. So for instance, just as a last time through, if you remember the detailing aspects of this, this isn't going to work for all of them, but let's say you wanted to go inside of this and instead put some holes in here to lighten it up because it was an airframe. That would be an airframe in a building, I don't know, but maybe you had some stuff lying around. I'm just going to go ahead and push this through, and I'm going to go ahead and, of course, right-click host component, and then each of those components would have the hole put in the same spot. So, thanks for listening. That's about all. Just that idea of styles and nesting and nesting blocks, nesting components is really important. Thanks for listening.